Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Non-League High Performance podcast. Today, we have the former Sheffield United assistant manager and current Whitstable town manager, Marcel Nimani. Hello, mate. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you doing, Miles?
Brilliant, thank you, mate. AJ, you ready to kick off?
Ready to kick off, mate. Thanks for joining us, Marcel. Obviously,
Pleasure.
everyone in non-league Sheffield would know who Marcel is. Someone that's actually done really well with Sheffield. Obviously, last season for part of their backroom staff that got the promotion last year. So we just wanted to ask you. We kick off by asking the same question we ask everyone in the podcast. What is high performance to you?
Good question. I think for us, we always focus, rather than focus on how to get a player to perform a high performance or defining the performance of a player, I think what we try and do as coaches is to control what we're in charge of. That's the environment. So we always look to create the environment which brings the high performance in players. So we don't necessarily focus on the individual stats that a player brings or how to get the best out of a player. Instead, we look to create the environment where players consistently as a unit perform. So on that topic, we look at breaking it down into different points. The first thing we look to do to establish in the right environment is the identity of play. So how do we want to play as a team? That's the first thing that we do. Once we've identified how we want to play on and off the ball, it moves you to the second stage of creating the right environment is being the recruitment. I think sometimes managers are quite embarrassed to talk about the recruitment, but the recruitment is a huge part of success, and the recruitment in non-league is ongoing. Principally, we always speak about the recruitment being, you start with a team and you stick with it. More often than not in non-league football, the recruitment is an ongoing process. The only thing that doesn't change is the ethos and the identity of play. So that's the second stage. Once we've created the recruitment process and identity of play, the next phase that we look at for us is in terms of creating a changing room where players play freely without a fear. So we hold players accountable to the basic things such as work rates, all the physical attributes. And if they go on to make mistakes within the system, then we keep reinforcing positivity within it. So players are playing without a fear. The next part of it, which is the bit that gets towards the mid part of the season, is clarity. I think by mid-season, you know who your players are. And by the mid-season, you've got out of 11, you probably find you've got 8 or 9 of those players that start for you regularly. And you just have to create clarity in how you want players to play. So that includes in every scenario, on and off the ball, players know what to do and what decision makings to make. And I think once you reach that clarity stage, that's when the consistency kicks in. So this is what I mean by in terms of creating the right environment to collectively bring the players to perform consistency or high performance.
So if we look at obviously everything you've said to us now, if we say to you, what is the Marcel's core values for your team at Whitstable? What would you say your core values are?
That's a very, very good question. First thing that we look at is the discipline and the commitment to the cause. What I mean by that is to commit to non-league football, particularly for a lot of players that we recruit, because we recruit players from a vast region of Southeast. We seek talent. It requires a lot of commitment and a lot of discipline to stick to that commitment. So what we say to players is, whilst it requires a lot of commitment, you need to believe in the reward that you get out of it. And I think for us, that commitment and discipline is huge. Once they're with us, it's just everybody are held accountable to be good teammates for one another. So when we get to the winter phase, particularly in December, January, and February, we reach a new stage where in the winter, and what you might find this as a manager yourself, the life challenges that people face during the winter are a lot more challenging than any part of the season. So the players work, they have issues at home, they have problems at work. And more often than not, if you don't manage this during the winter periods, you find that they bring that into the changing room. And that's when the changing room starts to collapse during the winter periods because of the lifestyle challenges that players face. So we have value that the moment you enter the stadium, your lifestyle is away, you're committed to the changing room, and you bring positive energy. And we hold players accountable.
How would you identify if a lifestyle's changed for a normal player like us? How would you actually understand that? What do you do? What do you look at?
We have a playful ethos in the changing room. So the music, the games, the spinner, the fines, these are all little interventions in games that we play in a changing room to create a playful changing room. So it's a cohesive changing room. And when the players are coming in and bringing in baggage from their lifestyle because of their mood, changes in behavior, they bring in negativity, they snap, they have negative comments to say about whatever scenario, they manage their disappointment in an unprofessional way. So these are all the little behavior things that we pick up and we just try to eliminate. And leagues are won, but in my view, are won December, January, and February time, because that is when teams become most inconsistent. And for the teams that manage the winter period better are the teams that manage the changing room. So we eliminate any form of behavior that brings negativity within the changing room. And these are all controllable factors. So we hold players accountable to the things that are controllable. So it's up to them. So it's a fair judgment, a fair assessment.
Yeah. So could I ask you a question? Before you got the Whitstable job, someone else was in charge of that job. And they've done an amazing job before you took over. Obviously, it wasn't great, but they was doing their best in that club. How far away was the club from your core value that you said to us earlier?
Problem with Whitstable's been a team in transition for 3 seasons now. So if you look at their journey, they've had quite a lot of managers, and every manager leaves his own footprint, or by bringing his own players, by creating a mentality how they want them to play, by creating an idea how they want them to play. So every manager that's coming in has a different way. Everybody leaves a different DNA. So when you go into a club, the 3 years of their 5 managers, it's a transition period. So it's quite an unstable environment. And the first thing that we focused was just trying to buy them into an idea. Don't force an opinion on others. Try to get them to understand. So we brought in stats straight away. We looked at the style of play that was done before us, and we looked at the style of play that we want to do. And we were looking at the short passes, long passes, and their success rate. So we identified straight away that our style of play is more successful. Then we looked at the touches as individuals. So most of the players were touching the ball 50 to 60% more times than had been done previously. So again, it's more enjoyable. So we were selling our identity to the players using the stats. Once we brought them into identity of play, then the players almost enjoy it better and they commit to the demands that you create for them. So rather than just force the demands, give them something to understand why those demands are important.
And how did the boys take the first few weeks when you took over? It's going to be a massive transition. Even from us, from outside, we knew what type of football you like to play, and we knew the type of football Whitstable played before. How was it to adapt into your system very quick? And what did you have to do to get the best out of them?
To be fair, I was quite blessed, actually. I was welcomed. I've been welcomed at the club by players and staff. So we didn't actually experience any challenge in terms of us being welcomed. The players were automatically or immediately, bought into our style of play. I mean, it took a while for them to get consistent at playing it, but in terms of their wants and their desires, we didn't actually face any challenges. They were quite welcome straight away.
Last season, so you wasn't a good Sheppey side last season, and I think consistently winning every single week. At Whitstable, at the beginning, wasn't as what it was for you last season. How was your mindset? Obviously, when you was at home, at games, how did you feel about obviously not winning every single week then?
Tough, isn't it? What I've actually figured out in the last 2 months, and I'm so glad that I took this challenge on, when you're going through a system that you're constantly winning, and we didn't, if you know yourself, we weren't changing anything. It was so consistent, so fluent. You actually become quite lazy. And last year, towards the last 10, 15 games, although we were playing big games, I recognised that we become quite lazy because we were just playing the same system. Now that I've come into a new system, same mentality, but it wasn't working. The adjustments has made us more active, has made us more creative. So we've had to adjust in a number of ways in terms of how we play, in terms of how we coach the way we play, in terms of how we keep the players motivated when you're not winning. These are the challenges we weren't facing last year. So winning all the time is good for your ego and is good for your enjoyment. But I tell you what, it's not always good for your development because you become quite lazy. And so it's definitely getting out of a comfort zone. I've gone on to become a far more knowledgeable coach than what I was last year.
So in that Sheppey side, what did you have to do to keep the boys motivated? Because winning every week just becomes natural to you, to the boys. What did you do to keep that standard up? And what was the mood like in the change room?
Competition. We trained hard, but we did that all the time. We had aspiration. We had that all the time. But if you actually look at our history as Sheppey, every 4 weeks a new player came in. The moment one dropped, and it sounds harsh, sounds horrible, but we were there to serve the club. The players themselves knew that they had to perform for the better themselves. If they wanted to achieve the success that we had, we kept the competition alive. Our recruitment was constantly ongoing. And that was the brutality. But what it did mean is that our starting 11, we had 9 players who played throughout the season for us. And those 9 players were consistently high performers. And there were times where even those 9 players were changed and chopped and changed. So consistency and competition through recruitment really made that. And obviously moving on to the tactics, we played in the way the players at their strength. So we recruited based on our philosophy. So players were playing the system that they knew, they had clarity, their strength came out, and ultimately psychologically they were motivated.
So when you was doing your recruitment, what sort of things do you look for in a player that's coming into a winning team? Because obviously the team's winning. Now, how do you go and get someone better than what you've got already? What do you look for? What characters do you look for?
You have 2 types of players that we found last year. You've got the type of players who can maintain consistency, and you have a type of players who you change their environment, and the changes in the environment trigger them to perform at a high level. But the moment they get comfortable, they drop those testosterone levels that keep them on the edge. And then you're already identify that quite beginning on, because you see the intensity of the training. At times we had to use training sessions to identify who's going to start over who, because you couldn't use the performance on the pitch because we were winning all the time anyways.
Yeah.
And then it became the players recognized that the quality of their performance in a training session would determine who starts the next game and who doesn't. So it's just these fine margins. And the training sessions, I mean, we used to train, and I used to say to the players, if you want to win the league, the training sessions have to be harder than the actual competition you're playing against, because you're playing against potentially the best players in the league. So if you want to prove here that you can do it against the best players in the league amongst yourselves, then surely you can do it against the teams that are coming, looking to finish 3rd and 4th. But yeah, competition.
That's good. So I spoke to someone on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, that's not come out yet. I asked him a question about how do you identify a team player, and he said obviously they're full time as well, and he sits by the canteen and see who takes all the food and who doesn't share. So what would you say? What opportunities do you use to find out if a player's got a team player or not a team player?
That's a good question, actually. How you identify. I think there's sometimes you've also got to remember, as a coach, you have a lot of emotional intelligence, and then you assess the players. Once you draw them in, you assess them in the initial conversations. You can use a lot of intuition and a lot of emotional intelligence to assess what type of personality they are. We didn't exactly have a specific test that we were testing about. Is he going to fit in? Is he going to gel in? It's just a matter, you bring them in, you create an open, fair environment for everybody to perform. And then if they showed signs of behaviour that didn't necessarily suit us, then they would go down the pecking order.
So the question of the day: attitude or talent?
It's difficult. It would have to depend. When you're talking attitude, how bad of an attitude? So if the attitude affects the changing room, then it's a no-no straight away. If it's an attitude that you can work with, if it's an attitude where you as a coach take pride in wanting to change that player, and that player is open enough or to want to change, then you can't accept that, providing they've got the talent. But if it's an attitude where you can't work with, then yeah, you automatically eliminate the individual.
AJ?
Yes.
You're a manager yourself. I'm going to ask you, attitude or talent?
For me, it's totally different. Obviously, we're official. We haven't got no budget. So the clubs I've worked with, we've never had a budget. there's going to be attitude, but I believe we have to work to get them in line with what I want to do. So I've had players who play steps 2 now and they had the worst attitude ever. And obviously, I'm not going to drop names in there, but we have to work hard to make sure that they stay settled and stay focused on the job ahead. On the pitch, they did what we want them to do, but you get players coming in late to training. Got players not turning up for training. But when you're not paying, and we're a team small like Fisher, we've got to accept some of the attitude that's going to come with it. And then again, like the other day, Dulwich manager said, talent, that he's a sucker for talent. I'm a sucker for talent. I love talents. But again, you never get both of it when you don't pay. So yeah, I'm just in the middle of it, and I just don't know which one to pick yet. But again, just if he's got good attitude or bad attitude, I have to work with it, because that's all I've got, really.
It just depends on the potential of either, isn't it? If it's an attitude where the potentially can change, then you're willing to accept it.
Yeah.
If he's got ability with the potential to change, to get better, then you can work with it. But if the potential isn't there to grow in either of the departments, then I think it's a no-go. Because you have to remember, there's a lot of players around who wouldn't appreciate the opportunity better.
Yes. So the next question I've got for you is, what gaffers do you look up to in non-league and in a professional league, and why?
So at the moment, I've got quite a few, to be fair. There's a lot. So I look at the likes of Jay Saunders, and I look at his career in non-league football, and I would love to achieve half of what Jay's achieved by the time I retire. The closest guy that I work for at the moment with is Kevin Watson at Herne Bay. So I see him as a mentor. I speak to him regularly. Slightly different to the way he does things, but nonetheless, I look up to him in terms of as a mentor role. He's a good friend of mine. So yeah, I'd say Jay Saunders and Kevin Watson would be the 2 top guys.
And if we look at the professional game?
The likes of, I've always been intrigued by the likes of Mourinho. He was always my guy, and I love the fact that he's a tactical master, but he also huge in psychology. And these are the 2 things that I always thrived in coaching: the psychology management of the changing room, as well as the tactical creativity.
How do you develop yourself outside football to make sure that you are high performers at all time? What do you do?
Same as most of the non-league managers. I'm just obsessed. I'm obsessed with non-league football. I actually don't watch a lot of professional football. I've drawn away from it. When I was young, I grew up watching the likes of, before I moved to England, I used to watch the likes of AC Milan. I was a huge fan. Then I got into the Premiership. When I moved to UK, we used to follow West Ham. But as I stopped playing, I got into non-league. I would love watching non-league. I watch a lot of non-league games, and I always look at how one team defends, how one team attacks, the teams that are successful, how they're attacking and defending, how they're going from an attack and defense, what specific players they're using. So by just watching a lot of games, and I have a lot of friends who come from coaching background, and we just always share ideas and make time for one another. And I've got a very, very good coaching team with me at Whitstable at the moment. We have our Friday nights and throughout the week Zoom calls that constantly talking about.
Yeah. So for you, do you watch any other sports and try to mirror into football? Because what I do, I watch rugby, like I said last time. So I watch a lot of rugby, and obviously the physicality, the eye press, the front foot, that's what I love, and that's what my team's built around. It's just that basic, them 3 things that I've took from rugby into football. And it's worked for us, and it's worked for us a lot this season. And it's only this season I've applied it, and it's really working for us. What do you do from a different sports?
Very, very, very similar to you. Because I'm a PE teacher by trade, so I get a chance to practice sports regularly. I follow the very similar to the rugby. Rather than the tactical, I follow the rugby culture. So I refer to my players as gentlemen. So I ask my players to perform like rugby players in the pitch, where you hammer, physical, you don't take it personally, you stand up, shake hands. Once the game's over, you behave like a rugby player, which is what the rugby culture involves. You batter one another on a pitch. After the game, you shake hands, you enjoy yourself, go, drink, eat, do your thing. So I'm a huge admirer of the rugby culture. There's no prima donnas in rugby. It's physical, you win your battles, finish the game, and it's just gentleman behaviour afterwards.
So going forward, what level would you like to be at in the next, say, 5-6 years?
I was quite set last year being my last year in Scaffold. You know, I love the league and I have a huge respect for the club, the managers, and I've established myself a great relationship across the Scaffold teams. I have a huge respect, but I do think that my time is now to move to the Isthmian League. So I think my next year or two, I'm going to try the Isthmian South and then Prem. I'd love to, in 5, 6, 7 years time to be a step 2, step 1. I'm open to all roles. So for me, it's not the case where I have to, I'm not egoistic enough where I just have to be a manager. I just want to enjoy it in a football club where I'm learning. So yeah, I would say that 5, 6 years time, I'd like to be around step 2, step 1 level.
That's good. Thank you so much for your time today, Marcel. I've taken a lot from this as well again, and I'm going to be writing a lot down. And I've picked your brain a lot, so we're going to be using some of your tactics and awareness at Fisher as well. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. And I think a lot of people will take a lot from that, especially where you've done really, really well from last season at Sheppey. And bringing it into Whitstable this season. I think I looked at the table yesterday. You're third in the league now, and the club was never in a wildest dream to be third in the league when you took over. So you've done an amazing job, and I just hope it carries on.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate the invite, and I wish you guys the best. Thank you, Miles.
Thank you very much, mate. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
I'd like to thank Marcel for coming onto the podcast, and we'd like to wish himself and Whitstable Town the very best of luck for the rest of the season.